The Plague of Justinian. In the markets of Constantinople, the greatest city in the world, merchants traded silks and spices from distant lands. The Byzantine Empire stretched from Spain to Persia, and Emperor Justinian dreamed of restoring Rome's ancient glory. His armies had reconquered North Africa and Italy. His architects built the magnificent Hagia Sophia. Trade ships arrived daily, connecting 3 continents in a web of commerce that made the capital incomparably wealthy. Then, the grain ships came from Egypt. Hidden in the cargo holds, rats carried fleas infected with Yersinia pestis. The disease reached Constantinople in 5141 AD, and within weeks, the imperial capital transformed into a charnel house. Victims developed fever and swollen lymph nodes called buboes. Most died within days. The illness showed no mercy to class or status. It killed peasants and nobles with equal efficiency. At the pandemic's peak, 5,000 to 10,000 people died every day. Workers couldn't dig graves fast enough. Justinian ordered the towers of the city's fortifications hollowed out to stack corpses. Ships were loaded with the dead and sent out to sea. The streets emptied. Commerce stopped. The empire's administration ground to a halt. The plague ravaged the Mediterranean world for 2 centuries, returning in waves. Between 25 and 50 million people perished. The Byzantine Empire never recovered its strength. Justinian's dream of Roman restoration died with his subjects. The same trade routes that had made the empire prosperous became highways for devastation. It proved that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to enemies they cannot see, the Black Death. In the autumn of 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina. The sailors who staggered off those ships were dying. Massive black boils covered their bodies. Blood and pus leaked from every orifice. Most were dead within days of the first symptoms appearing. The horrified Sicilian authorities ordered the ships to leave immediately, but it was already too late. The pestilence had come ashore. Europe in 1347 was thriving. The population had reached an all-time high. Trade along the Silk Road brought unprecedented wealth. Cities were growing, cathedrals were rising, and the future seemed bright. The plague moved with terrifying speed. From Sicily, it spread through Italy, then France, then across the continent like wildfire. The symptoms were unmistakable and horrifying. Painful swellings called buboes appeared in the lymph nodes. Skin turned black from subcutaneous bleeding. Victims developed gangrene in their extremities. Most died within 3 to 5 days of infection. The mortality rate was catastrophic. In some villages, every single person died. Cities lost half their populations. The dead outnumbered the living's ability to bury them. Bodies piled up in the streets. Mass graves couldn't be dug fast enough. People tried everything. They fled to the countryside, unknowingly spreading the disease to new communities. They prayed. They flagellated themselves. They blamed outsiders and minorities. Nothing worked. When the Black Death finally burned itself out in 1353, between 75 and 200 million people were dead. 30 to 60% of Europe's entire population had been wiped out. The feudal system began collapsing as labor became scarce and valuable. The plague didn't just kill people, it killed the medieval world itself, smallpox in the Americas. When Hernán Cortés arrived in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1519, he found a city larger than any in Europe. Grand temples rose above causeways crossing massive lakes. Markets bustled with tens of thousands of people. The Aztec Empire commanded millions of subjects across a sophisticated civilization that had flourished for centuries. But the Spanish conquistadors carried weapons far deadlier than their steel swords and gunpowder. They carried diseases to which the indigenous peoples had no immunity whatsoever. In 1520, a Spanish soldier infected with smallpox arrived in Mexico. The virus spread with terrifying speed through the densely populated Aztec capital. Within months, the disease was killing thousands daily. The Emperor Cuitlahuac died of smallpox. His successor Cuauhtémoc faced a city where corpses filled the streets faster than they could be buried. The Spanish siege succeeded not through military superiority, but because smallpox had already devastated the defenders. From Mexico, smallpox radiated outward across both continents. The Inca Empire fell to a combination of civil war triggered by a smallpox epidemic and Spanish invasion. In some regions, 90% of the indigenous population died within a century. Entire civilizations collapsed. Languages disappeared. Knowledge systems vanished. Historians estimate 56 million indigenous people died from European diseases in the Americas, making it the largest demographic catastrophe in human history. Disease became the most effective tool of conquest. reshaping 2 continents forever, the Great Plague of London. In the cramped, filthy streets of 17th century London, nearly 500,000 people lived pressed against one another in timber houses that leaned so close their upper floors nearly touched. The bubonic plague had never truly left Europe since the Black Death, lurking in port cities and flaring up every few years, but Londoners had grown almost accustomed to its presence. That complacency would prove fatal. In the spring of 1665, the first cases appeared in the parish of St. Giles in the Fields, London's poorest district. Within weeks, the telltale signs appeared across the city. Red crosses painted on doors marked infected households, accompanied by the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." Those inside were locked in by order of the Lord Mayor, forced to remain with their sick and dying family members. At night, death carts rolled through the streets as collectors called out, "Bring out your dead," gathering corpses for mass burial in plague pits. By summer, the disease killed 7,000 people each week. The wealthy fled to their country estates, abandoning the city to its poor. King Charles II and his court retreated to Oxford. Those who remained faced a nightmare city of shuttered shops, empty markets, and streets patrolled by guards enforcing quarantine. By the time the outbreak ended in early 1666, 100,000 Londoners lay dead, nearly a quarter of the population. Months later, the Great Fire consumed much of the medieval city. From the ashes, a new London emerged, built with wider streets and stricter building codes. Catastrophe had finally taught lessons that centuries of smaller outbreaks could not, the third cholera pandemic. In the Ganges Delta of Bengal, a disease had lurked for centuries, in the brackish water where sacred rivers met the sea. Cholera was endemic to India, but in 1852, something changed. British colonial trade routes created perfect conditions for what had been a local threat to become a global catastrophe. The disease followed pilgrims returning from Mecca, soldiers marching to distant wars, and merchants sailing to foreign ports. Within months, cholera swept across Asia, devastating cities from Calcutta to Constantinople. It crossed into the Middle East, then leaped to Europe and the Americas on steamships packed with immigrants seeking new lives. The symptoms were horrifying. Victims suffered violent diarrhea and vomiting, losing liters of fluid in hours. Their skin turned blue from severe dehydration. Healthy people could die within a day of first symptoms. In London alone, thousands perished as the disease spread through overcrowded neighborhoods. But in 1854, a London physician named John Snow made a revolutionary discovery. He mapped cholera cases in Soho and noticed they clustered around one source, the Broad Street water pump. When he convinced authorities to remove the pump handle, new infections stopped. His meticulous investigation proved cholera spread through contaminated water, not bad air as everyone believed. Over 1 million people died worldwide in this pandemic, but Snow's discovery revolutionized epidemiology. A single doctor's observation in one London neighborhood changed how humanity understands disease transmission, proving that careful science could defeat invisible enemies. The third plague pandemic. In the Chinese province of Yunnan, something ancient was stirring in the rat populations. Bubonic plague, the same disease that had devastated medieval Europe, had lain dormant for centuries in remote mountain villages. But in the 1850s, political instability and rebellion disrupted these isolated communities, forcing infected rats into contact with human populations they'd avoided for generations. The plague spread slowly at first, moving through southern China's trading networks. Then it reached the coast. In 1894, it exploded through Hong Kong, killing thousands in a matter of weeks. But this time, the disease had something medieval plague never possessed: steamships. Within months, infected rats hiding in cargo holds had carried the plague to every inhabited continent. Bombay, Sydney, San Francisco, Honolulu, Cape Town, major ports worldwide reported outbreaks. The disease moved at the speed of industrial commerce, turning global trade routes into transmission corridors. India suffered most catastrophically. Over the following decades, between 12 and 15 million Indians died as the plague swept through overcrowded cities and villages. The British colonial government's response proved woefully inadequate, focusing more on controlling panic than controlling disease. Yet from this catastrophe came breakthrough. In Hong Kong, French bacteriologist Alexandre Yersin identified the bacteria responsible, naming it Yersinia pestis. His discovery laid the groundwork for understanding plague transmission and eventually developing effective treatments. The pandemic continued smoldering for over a century, with cases reported into the 1960s. It proved that the same technology connecting the world into a global economy also connected its diseases. Medieval plague now traveled at industrial speeds. The 1918 Spanish flu. In the final year of the Great War, soldiers in the trenches of France began falling ill with what seemed like ordinary flu. Within days, healthy young men were drowning in their own fluids, their lungs hemorrhaging, their skin turning blue from oxygen deprivation. But this was no ordinary flu. The pandemic likely began in Kansas, where overcrowded military camps became perfect incubators. American soldiers carried it across the Atlantic, spreading it through the packed trenches of Europe. From there, it exploded across the globe with devastating speed. It earned the name Spanish flu, not because Spain was the origin, but because Spain, neutral in the war, was the only country whose press freely reported the outbreak. Warring nations censored news of the disease, fearing it would damage morale. The virus attacked in 3 waves between 1918 and 1920. Unlike typical influenza, which kills the very young and very old, this strain targeted people in their 20s and 30s. Their strong immune systems turned against them, creating deadly cytokine storms that destroyed healthy lung tissue. Young mothers, soldiers, factory workers, the strongest members of society, died by the millions. Cities implemented mask mandates and banned public gatherings. Hospitals overflowed. Morgues ran out of space. Bodies were stacked in warehouses. Between 50 and 100 million people died worldwide, far exceeding the death toll of the war itself. It demonstrated that nature could kill more efficiently than any human war machine. The Antonine Plague. Roman legions returning from campaigns in Mesopotamia brought more than plunder and glory. In 165 AD, soldiers who had just conquered the Parthian Empire carried an invisible enemy back through the gates of Rome. Within months, what was likely smallpox began spreading through the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. The physician Galen documented the symptoms with clinical precision. Victims developed fever, followed by a distinctive rash that covered their bodies in pustules. The disease moved with terrifying efficiency along Rome's famous road network, the very infrastructure that had unified an empire now serving as highways for death. From Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria, no province remained untouched. At the pandemic's peak, 2,000 people died daily in Rome alone. The army, which had seemed invincible on every battlefield, found itself decimated by an enemy it couldn't fight. Entire legions were wiped out, not by barbarian swords, but by microscopic pathogens. Even Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king himself, likely fell victim to the plague in 180 AD. Between 5 and 10 million people died over 15 years. The empire's borders, once steadily expanding, began contracting as weakened legions could no longer hold back invasions. Trade collapsed, cities emptied, and the economy spiraled into crisis. Rome would continue for centuries, but it never fully recovered its former strength. The Antonine Plague didn't destroy the empire, but it began the slow decline that would eventually lead to its fall. Rome's greatest strength, its connectivity, became its fatal vulnerability, the Russian flu. In the age of telegraphs and railroads, news traveled faster than ever before. In the winter of 1889, reports began arriving from Central Asia of a mysterious respiratory illness spreading with unprecedented speed. This would become the first pandemic of the industrial age, and it would reveal how modern transportation had fundamentally changed the nature of disease. The illness likely originated in Bukhara, or St. Petersburg, in late 1889. Within weeks, it reached Europe via the newly completed Trans-Siberian Railway. From there, steamships carried it across the Atlantic to America, across the Mediterranean to Africa, and across the Pacific to Asia. What would have taken years in previous centuries now took mere months. For the first time in history, people could track a pandemic's approach in real time. Telegraph operators transmitted daily updates on infection rates and deaths. Newspapers published maps showing the disease's advance across continents. Citizens watched helplessly as the invisible enemy moved closer to their cities, knowing exactly when it would arrive but powerless to stop it. The virus spread through schools, factories, and tenements with ruthless efficiency. In major cities, so many workers fell ill simultaneously that businesses shuttered and public services ground to halt. The symptoms were familiar: fever, cough, exhaustion, but the sheer scale was new. By the time it burned out in 1890, the Russian flu had killed approximately 1 million people worldwide. The mortality rate was relatively low, but the experience transformed public health infrastructure. Cities established disease surveillance systems, and nations began coordinating international health responses. For the first time, humanity could see a pandemic coming, but still couldn't stop it. Typhus in WWII. In the frozen trenches of the Eastern Front, soldiers faced enemies beyond opposing armies. Lice infested every uniform, every blanket, every body. In the cramped, filthy conditions of trench warfare, where men lived like rats in muddy holes, these tiny parasites carried a microscopic killer, typhus. The disease struck the Eastern Front with particular fury. Russia, already struggling under the weight of war, saw its armies decimated not by German bullets, but by bacterial infection. Serbia and Romania suffered catastrophic outbreaks as military and civilian populations mixed in chaotic retreats. The symptoms were brutal: high fever, severe headaches, a distinctive rash that spread across the body. Delirium followed. Then, often, death. Prisoner of war camps became death traps. Overcrowding pushed thousands of men into spaces designed for hundreds. Malnutrition weakened immune systems. Sanitation was non-existent. Typhus spread like wildfire through these camps, then escaped into civilian populations as guards, workers, and released prisoners carried infected lice home to their families. Between 1914 and 1918, typhus killed an estimated 3 million people on the Eastern Front alone. The Russian Revolution unfolded against a backdrop of typhus epidemics. Lenin himself recognized the threat, declaring that either socialism would defeat the louse, or the louse would defeat socialism. The disease respected no borders, no battle lines, no political ideologies. It thrived wherever war created the perfect conditions: filth, overcrowding, desperation, and the complete breakdown of sanitation. Wars create the conditions for disease, and disease changes the outcome of wars. The Hong Kong flu. In July 1968, a new strain of influenza emerged in the crowded streets of Hong Kong and began its journey around the world. This wasn't like pandemics of the past, where diseases crawled across continents over months or years. This was the Jet Age, and the Hong Kong flu would demonstrate just how small our world had become. The virus reached the United States within weeks, carried by travelers on commercial flights. By September, it had touched every continent. What once would have taken a year now took barely 3 months. Airports had become the new disease highways, faster and more efficient than any trade route or railway line in history. The pandemic killed between 1 and 4 million people worldwide over the next 2 years. In the United States alone, it claimed approximately 100,000 lives. Schools closed, hospitals overflowed, and cities implemented emergency measures. But unlike previous pandemics, medical science now had tools to fight back. Vaccines were developed within months, though distributing them fairly across the globe proved impossible. The Hong Kong flu was considered moderate by pandemic standards, but its speed terrified epidemiologists. A disease could now breakfast in Hong Kong, lunch in London, and arrive in New York for dinner. Every international flight carried the possibility of transporting the next outbreak across oceans in hours. The Jet Age had made the world smaller and more connected than ever before. It also meant that every infectious disease was now instantly, unavoidably global. HIV/AIDS pandemic. In the summer of 1981, doctors in Los Angeles and New York noticed something terrifying. Young, previously healthy men were dying from infections that should have been harmless. Their immune systems had simply stopped working. Nobody knew why. The medical community scrambled to understand this. Mysterious illness. Some called it GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, because the first cases appeared in gay men. But that name revealed a dangerous assumption. This wasn't a gay disease. It was a human disease. By 1983, researchers identified the culprit, a virus that attacked the body's immune system itself. HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus, could hide in the body for years before developing into AIDS. During that time, infected people had no idea they were spreading it to others through blood and sexual contact. The virus spread silently across the globe. Hemophiliacs contracted it from contaminated blood transfusions. Drug users shared infected needles. In sub-Saharan Africa, entire villages were decimated. Mothers passed it to babies during childbirth. By the time symptoms appeared, it was already too late. 40 million people have died from AIDS. Millions of children were orphaned. For years, a diagnosis meant a death sentence. Then came the antiretrovirals. These medications couldn't cure HIV, but they could control it. A death sentence became a manageable chronic condition, but access remained deeply unequal. The life-saving drugs concentrated in wealthy nations. It proved that stigma and discrimination can be as deadly as any pathogen. The 2009 H1N1 swine flu pandemic. In April 2009, health officials in Mexico City noticed something wrong. Hospitals were filling with young, healthy people struggling to breathe. Within days, similar cases appeared across the country. This wasn't ordinary flu season. Scientists identified a novel H1N1 influenza strain containing genetic material from swine, avian, and human flu viruses. Unlike seasonal flu that primarily killed the elderly, this virus targeted the young and healthy. Mexico City shut down, an eerie preview of what would come 11 years later. The virus spread with stunning speed. Within weeks, cases appeared in the United States, Canada, and Europe. By June, the World Health Organization declared the first pandemic in over 40 years. Airlines continued operating, carrying infected passengers to every continent. Schools closed, concerts canceled. For the first time, people tracked a pandemic in real time through social media, watching infection maps update hourly on their computers. Pharmaceutical companies raced to develop vaccines using techniques refined over decades, but production couldn't match demand. Wealthy nations stockpiled doses while developing countries waited months for supplies. The virus ultimately infected an estimated 1.4 billion people worldwide, killing between 150,000 and 575,000. Yet compared to 1918 or even seasonal flu, the death rate remained relatively low. Medical advances meant ventilators and antivirals saved countless lives. The pandemic revealed both progress and persistent failures in global health equity. In the digital age, information and misinformation spread faster than any pathogen, a lesson the world would desperately need to remember. COVID-19. In December 2019, doctors in Wuhan, China reported cases of unusual pneumonia. The patients had fevers, coughs, and difficulty breathing. Some were dying. The Chinese government initially downplayed the outbreak, but by mid-January, the virus had spread beyond containable borders. Scientists identified a novel coronavirus named SARS-CoV-2. It spread through respiratory droplets, and, crucially, infected people could transmit it before showing symptoms. This silent spread meant traditional containment strategies arrived too late. By March 2020, the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic. What followed was unprecedented in modern history. Entire countries locked down. Streets in New York, London, and Mumbai emptied. Schools closed. Businesses shuttered. The global economy contracted in ways not seen since the Great Depression. Hospitals overflowed with patients gasping for air. Refrigerated trucks served as temporary morgues. Healthcare workers, exhausted and under-equipped, watched patients die alone, unable to say goodbye to their families. Yet the response also showcased humanity's capabilities. Scientists developed multiple vaccines in under a year, a process that typically takes a decade. mRNA technology, decades in development, finally proved its worth. But the pandemic exposed brutal inequalities. Wealthy nations hoarded vaccines while poorer countries went without. Misinformation spread as rapidly as the virus itself, politicizing basic public health measures. As of today, over 7 million people have officially died, though the true toll is likely far higher. COVID-19 transformed how we work, learn, and interact. It revealed that despite all our medical advances, a microscopic pathogen could still bring human civilization to its knees. If you found this exploration of history's most deadliest pandemics interesting, please consider giving it a like and leave a comment sharing which pandemic intrigued you most. Subscribe for more deep dives into the events that continue to puzzle and fascinate us. Thank you for watching.